From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports podcast.
The fastest growing entertainment phenomenon of this generation.
I, Prophet of Esports, joined today by my friend and co-host William Collis.
Yeah, we got the book of esports out. It's a big deal.
So everyone knows me as the Prophet and William as the Professor. They may call me the Prophet, but in my life outside of the business of esports, I have worked on the investment side of the table for the better part of the last 2 decades. The single fastest growing area of gaming and esports is gambling. It's booming right now. You don't need to be a prophet like me to see that. However, as an investor, I've stayed away from gambling and betting companies because of the reputational risk and often shady nature of the companies involved. This was true until now. I've recently bought stock in a new public company called Esports Entertainment Group, or EEG, which is focused on esports and gambling. The big difference that changed my mind is that EEG is a public company, NASDAQ listed, and fully regulated, focused on esports betting. The regulatory and audit requirements of a public company are key in my mind to provide the needed transparency for players, bettors, and investors. I had an opportunity to host the CEO of EEG on this podcast a couple of months ago, and I was very impressed by his vision for the company. We've stayed in touch, and I'm delighted to announce that they've accepted to become a sponsor of the podcast. If you're a family office, institutional investor, or investor of any kind, really, Esports Entertainment Group, ticker symbol GAMBLE, GMBL, might be one of the best ways to get exposure to the esports betting space and gaming in general. Make sure to check them out at esportsentertainmentgroup.com. Having said that, I need to make sure to state that this is only my opinion. I'm not an investment advisor or selling stock in the company. Please make sure you do your own research and seek advice from a licensed professional if you're looking to invest in the field. From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports podcast. I am Paul Dewalibi. I'm joined today by my friend and co-host, William Collis. For those of you who are new to the podcast, welcome to the official podcast of esports. What we do here is we cover the most pressing gaming and esports topics and news of the week, but we look at all of it through a business and C-suite lens. We dissect, we analyze the business implications of everything happening in this industry. For our regular listeners, thank you guys for tuning in every week. Thank you for all the love and support. Thank you for the 5-star ratings and reviews. We really appreciate it. If you haven't done so yet, please go leave a 5-star rating and review or go buy some Business of Esports merch. I highly recommend the socks.
Okay, actually,
or
can
go
I
buy the book of esports, right?
Oh, that's
you haven't already bought it.
Here.
I mean,
do
do you not have it? There you go. Go buy
I do.
the book.
Wait, I have a sock story. Can I tell my sock story really quickly?
Please tell your socks.
So I was at the dentist, and literally, I guess somehow your socks are very visible at the dentist because I guess your feet are up, and I don't know.
And your pants right up, maybe.
Yeah, and your pants. Right? And I had I'm not kidding. Everybody in the dentist office was like, wow, those socks really pop. And I was so excited. I was like, oh, thanks. They're for my podcast. And they're like, oh, great colors. And I was like, so I literally had to go back. I have to give the socks to the dent. And I was like, anyway, it was a cute
We could
story.
just ship him some socks, William. Is he gonna spread the word? Is he gonna wear them proudly?
We're gonna have an official dental hygienist sponsorship and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, it's
will he put up sponsored by the Business of Esports in his dental practice? Because then I'm cool with it.
I guarantee you, my dentist is actually very friendly. I guarantee if we made a plaque, he would put it up.
I don't know if this is good for our brand from, huge public company sponsoring us to small local dental office, but
you know what?
It's
about reach. It's about authenticity, Paul. He's an authentic fan. Yeah. All right. Enough joking around. Yeah.
Look, I don't want to waste too much time. We have a huge guest this week, William.
Amazing guest.
Again, I feel like every week it gets better and better here. And the beauty of this is our guest is a 2-time guest on this podcast, officially one of the 2 times club of the business of esports, and that is none other than Matthew Archambault, the head of partnerships for Riot Games in North America and OCE. Welcome, Matt, to the Business of Esports podcast.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. And thank you for having me back here. I think it's specifically coming off of your last episode where it was all about Logitech. It's tough shoes to fill, but I will try to do my best to provide as much information as I can. And I think it's kind of interesting. Just we were just talking about this. The last actual LAN event that I was at was the last time I was on this podcast, and that was at PAX East last year, which feels like it was about 2 ago, but at the same time, I know it was probably really only about 11 months ago. It was literally, I had that event, like the next day I got on a plane back to LAX, and I've been in LA ever since. So it kind of itching to get back to that.
Having you on the stage at PAX, Matt, was a bit surreal for me, frankly, because we started this podcast from really zero, and PAX has always been one of my favorite events, and having you there was really the icing on the cake. So thank you. And thank you for doing this, because I think William was a little fed up of all my hardware, like nerding out from last week. We need go back to some games nerding out this week.
It's hard for me to follow. I'm just not as hardware savant as Paul. So the whole Logitech podcast, I was like, yeah, mice. It's very DPI. You need, I have to have the high DPI. Like, that's critical.
RGB, just RGB light.
RGB, that's it.
More RGB. More
no
RGB.
joke. And the whole time I was doing it, I was like, oh, I shop based on the colors.
Do your socks have RGB? Because that's a question I want to know.
Working on it.
Great point. Working on it.
Working on it.
In development.
Chroma key.
Need a
Chroma key
recyclable
socks.
battery and everything else, but at least that's something else that could be really cool. Plus, it might be the first dental esports partnership ever. So there you go.
This is Matt. Just an interesting point, though. I am for the last 2 decades, I've been investing money in tech companies, right? And I am a relatively large shareholder in a company that does printed batteries, like very thin batteries. So I wouldn't rule out Business of Esports RGB socks. It is a possibility.
And quite seriously, and Matt, I'm sure you have the research to back this up. The more RGB accessories you have, the more accurate your aim is, right? In Valorant,
Yeah,
that's
the better you
100%
are at
established. Yeah.
Like, it's not even 100%, it's 1,000%. And if you have wallpaper that's RGB, and if everything is flashing, it just makes everything that much easier. It's amazing.
We're convinced. Yeah. It's like, it's literally, it's beyond, the R is greater than 1 in the correlation.
Now, Matt, we definitely now have to send you Business of Esports socks. But before we get to that, for our listeners who maybe weren't at PAX or didn't listen to that episode, because it has been a while, it's probably like 60 episodes ago now. Mm-hmm. We'd love for you to give our audience your background, how you got into gaming, what you're working on specifically at Riot, just some of the context and the background on you and your role.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm happy to jump into that. I guess, like, just to start with kind of my role and what I oversee and sort of what my team also looks at. So with my role as head of like partnerships for North America and Oceania, it really effectively hits everything from our esports to working with our publishing team. So anytime we're talking to like an outside third party, where we're talking about talent negotiations for on-air talent, or we're talking about licensing and other things when it comes to what we're doing within our region, that's all coming through myself and my team. So again, very simply said, if you're an outside third party, that's where myself and team get involved. We work through distribution. We work through everything that's all in the game, all of our partnerships that we have in esports, LCS, as well as Valorant, TFT, Lore, soon to be Drift when that comes over here to the US. So as we continue to roll out new titles, that's where my team really gets involved and gets into the nitty gritty of it. I would say, like, my background, I am not, even though I might look like, I might be 22 years old, I am not 22 years old. My career also did not
just... the podcast. He does look 22. Okay, if you're not watching this and you're listening to this, confirmed. Matt does not look older than 22.
100%. He gets ID'd every time he goes to the liquor store. That's the.
Funny story. Anytime I would wear a dress shirt and a blazer and walk around Riot's campus, someone in security would come up to me and ask me if I actually had a badge and I was an employee. Because they're like, you don't seem to fit the. You're not our CEO, but I don't know what you're doing here. And I'm like, got it anyway. Still want to go back to campus, but yeah. So my background is a little bit, I would say, different than sort of the standard gaming background and everything else. I actually kind of grew up on my career within the media agency side, and so I got a lot of exposure to working on businesses, including Gatorade, JCPenney, BP, Northwestern Mutual, a whole variety of them, and just starting in that career base. Effectively in New York. I then moved to Chicago. I was there for a while, and I've slowly continued to migrate west, even though the rest of my family all lives in New England, and they've getting blasted by the snow for the last day and a half. And I'm sitting here in about 65-degree weather, which is nice and chilly in LA. But I think I've always had an interest towards gaming. Back to having ColecoVision and thinking Pong was like the greatest thing ever because there was a stick that you can move and a ball, and then it got really fast and I couldn't see it. And then continuing to follow through with every other console that you can really think about, which again, continue to bring into college, and then you just run around dorm rooms and be playing Mario Kart at the time and everything. That was amazing. And actually GoldenEye was kind of a huge thing when I was there. And there was that one guy who knew every respawn place, and eventually you would upset them enough and they would go on like a 60-0 run and you're like, well, this is no fun anymore. I'm going to go have a beer and I'm done. But yeah, so I've always had a strong desire towards that. Similarly, always loved sports, and finding an opportunity to come to Riot, work in esports, work in that perfect combination. And I think I not unabashedly would say that Riot is synonymous with esports just based on where we've been and what we've done and where we want to go. So that's kind of been my trajectory, just starting in media, being involved, being on the brand side to a degree, and then coming over to the Riot side. So yeah, that's been my overall trajectory. I think in terms of what we've been working on lately, so I think for the LCS, League of Legends, our professional league here in the US, we just came out of our lock-in tournament, which my brand team might get mad to say it's sort of a preseason thing, but it's sort of an opening basically tournament event, best of 3, best of 5. Team Liquid won that, which was pretty exciting. We had a chance to see some of the new pros who've come over and new team dynamics. And then our season is starting actually on Friday for regular season, so that's great. Valorant, which I know we just talked about, that's already going on. The Challenger Series, the open qualifiers were last week. We're working with Nerd Street on that. The closed qualifiers are coming up actually tomorrow, I think. Either it's later tonight or tomorrow. My schedule has been shifted a little bit because of the Super Bowl. And then I think beyond that, it's getting involved in what we want to continue to do with our rebrand for the LCS. We're looking at some opportunities and exposure into Oceania with a couple partners, with a couple of our titles over there on the mobile side of things that don't want to announce just yet, but we're working towards that. And then similarly here, I think we're trying to drive into a little bit more of the connection of music and sort of the LCS and how we can combine all of this stuff. So a lot going on. There's a lot of kind of plates in the air, keeps us very, very busy. It's definitely not a 9-to-5 job. Anyone who's interested in esports, not a 9-to-5 job. A week is basically like a month. So after a year, you feel like you've aged about 10. You stay in it for 5 years, and you're getting RGB socks. Like that's basically where you're at. So
very interesting, Matt. So I'm curious, are there any specific major partnerships that you've signed or that are in the works that you're most excited about? You mentioned music, which Fortnite has done very successfully. Are these are you seeing that evolve? Are you seeing the partnership space evolve at all?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so for music, we've been speaking to a number of labels here domestically. I think as people, if anyone has followed League of Legends esports on a global scale, you've seen our opening ceremonies, what we've done with KDA, KDA2, True Damage. There's been a ton that's happened there. MasterCard's been a great partner on a global scale for us in that. MasterCard's also a partner domestically for us too. We had Logic last year that came out of retirement for us for an execution for our summer finals. So I think what we're trying to do is just create a more connected ecosystem, so that we can showcase various artists. We can use basically we are hitting that 18 to 34-year-old audience in a way that other platforms just are not doing anymore. And you're seeing it with traditional sports. I know you guys have talked about Major League Baseball quite a lot, between this and the after party kind of stuff that you guys do, which I'll leave you to dive into that later. But I think for us, the composition of that audience continues to grow. And so I think most recently, we just brought on Grubhub as our official food delivery partner, and we're really excited about some of those elements coming up. So we'll be kicking off this weekend, where we're going to be presenting a lot of unique elements back to our fans. So if you're watching, there could be some Easter eggs, there could be some great codes that we're going to be able to do and deliver. And then that all really leads into our finals. I think there's a couple other partners I can't necessarily directly talk about now, but I think what we're really trying to find is, and our position has always been, we're not just going to take a brand because they said, here's $1, right? Go run. For us, it really needs to be you investing as a brand and an entity towards our space, and not investing just with money, but are you actually committed to it? Are you committed to the community, right? And I think that kind of speaks to every title and every sport. And that's the angle that we always try to drive into is, what do you want to do? And if this is just a thing you're doing on the side, great. There are other platforms for that, right? You can run ads all day long, but if you really want to get involved with a publisher, you want to get involved into the ecosystem, one of the hardest things to describe to people is always like, if we do something wrong with a brand, like brand A or brand Z or whatever it was, if I were to launch the business of esports RGB socks, right, on next week, and if we just put that out there and it didn't hit, Reddit would blame me. They're not going to come after you so much. They're going to come to me and say, what are you guys doing? More RGB or less RGB, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
obviously more, but yeah.
Obviously more. I mean, clearly. I think it's just always interesting because in sort of other sports and in general media and just general media business, people are always on the mindset of, if a brand does something, they're the ones who get flamed. But when you get into our world, it's a little bit different. And I think that's a unique element of just like working with the right brand and the partner to figure out what that solution is. But there are also times where, we might go a little overboard. Like every brand is now so trepidatious of like, I don't know, should I get in? Should I not get in? Am I going to be authentic? Pick another buzzword to go into it. And it's like, look, it's not that scary. It's just try to work with us and trust that we know our audience, just like you know your customer and you know your audience. And I think those are the elements that really, that do resonate here beyond anything else.
So I have actually a very interesting question I want to kick off on music potentially. I guess I shouldn't say my own question is interesting, but I find an interesting contrast between the Riot music strategy and what I see is a lot of the other music strategy in the industry, probably best exemplified by Epic and Fortnite, right? And what I would say is the Epic Fortnite strategy, and this is, please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to make some assertions here and tell me if I don't have the facts right, because I'm not an music is a weak area for me, let's be honest. But the assessment I have is that the Fortnite strategy appears to be a partnership strategy, right? It's like, let's find big artists and let's give them a platform, a concert venue, whatever it is in our world. The Riot strategy, maybe there's a piece of that, but I really look at KDA as the forefront of how Riot approaches music. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is KDA was basically manufactured by Riot, right? Like it's a Riot composite music group. And so it's not a partner strategy, it's sort of an own strategy. And in fact, because of that, it's much more tightly integrated. Like I think Ari and some of the champions are actually voiced by the KDA singers, right? Again, please correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. I'm going on my, my memory here, which is not as sharp as it used to be. Yeah. So I'm just curious, like, what's driving that decision to own versus partner? And is it just the cards fell out that way, or is it a deeper strategic view that Riot has about how to approach the music space?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think there's definitely a couple different strategic approaches to this, as you just leaned into. I also don't want to directly put words in Toa and Andre and the entire music team's mouth, because they will come after me. But I think the approach here is really in the sense of like Epic, and you kind of described it, it's a bit of a platform, right? It's an experience. People are showing up, they're there. I know you guys have talked about it being a little bit social, but it's also just kind of an overarching environment, right? That can hold a lot of things. Whereas for us, specifically with League of Legends, Summoner's Rift is Summoner's Rift, right? Like it is Runeterra does not exist in real life, right? It is its own universe. It's our own Marvel or Star Wars universe, however you want to like really look at it. And so we needed to keep something aligned with whatever that like ecosystem was. And so for us, the extension of that ecosystem was in many ways being able to take the champions that we have and then be able to build something around it, which also kind of builds into our world championship. So it all kind of comes back to that narrative where you start the season, where season starts, it's competitive play, everyone's getting in and getting ready to go. There's always a couple beats during the year where there might be different skin lines or other things that come out, and there's kind of the storyline of those champions. And then that really breeds into the culmination, which is it's our world champion, right? You get a chance to be that world champion. And so that's where a lot of those acts come into play. I mean, in fact, I think Riot has actually produced about 200 songs, which is kind of crazy, right? Because we are a gaming company. Our expertise is not a music label, but we've aligned ourselves in the sense of being we're basically, we work with everyone, right? Like we try to define the vision and then we'll go to market with that vision versus saying we are only going to go down this one hole and it has to be hip hop or it doesn't, right? Like KDA year one was more K-pop. Obviously, where world championships were. When we got into True Damage, it became a little bit more kind of urban and hip hop, and it was Paris. So it was like kind of perfect for that mentality. So I think that's kind of how like we've really approached this, is how to stay true to the player, how to stay true to the fan and carry it through versus we're just going to have a pop-up concert next weekend. It's tough with Summoner's Rift.
But I want to push even a little bit deeper here. And again, I mean, because I actually think music is a huge opportunity space for games and the music hybridization. And it's not even, my understanding is it's not even that like Riot picked a group and integrated the group into the world. Like my understanding is Riot Games has its own music label and publishes the music itself. Like you could have partnered with, any one of the labels, at least for distribution, right? But you did that yourself. That's a very purposeful strategic decision, right? That says, I mean, are we correct in reading that as music is, a valuable owned pillar for Riot going forward? Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's not just music, it's the entire ecosystem, right? Like there's entertainment in general around what we want to do. We've communicated that we want to be a top 3, a top 2 IP, right? Like we have the lore, we have the history, we have 180 champions, right? All of these books, all of this. We've partnered with Marvel for comics. We have a show coming out, Arcane, right? So there's a lot of stuff that we're starting to do in that. And I think to your point, William, it really just dives into, instead of saying I'm going to go lease something, right? Like if I lease it, it might be gone, right? Or I'm going to go here and I'm going to take it. Since it's our IP and that we kind of feel like we know what works best with our audience, the mindset has been, let's go produce and execute and bring people in and actually deliver it. I mean, we do all the in-game sounds too, obviously all the champions, everything else. So I think that's the position. It's been less of a lease and more about we're going to own this and then we can distribute it through the minds that we want to.
So, oh yeah, you go. I'm done. I'm done.
Kind of proves your thesis, right? All great companies eventually become Disney.
Well, so this was my
Riot is one of those that we think could become Disney, right?
Well, but here's the question that I have, which is really, I do, Matt, if you don't know this, I have this thesis that basically like Disney is the company and all companies evolve. Like basically all business models are just iterating closer, which is, I mean, it's a little, obviously it's an exaggeration, but I have enormous respect for Disney and their strategy and sort of what they built. But anyway, leaving that aside, right? I think the thing I'm curious about is, so one thing you did see Disney struggle with is when they got to this modern, very brand first incarnation, they had a challenge, which is they had all these separate sub brands that didn't necessarily live together or belong together. And so when Disney wanted to do pan IP projects like Disney Infinity is the example I always think of, their homegrown video games, it was actually a real struggle, right? Because there wasn't a lot of precedence for how, like, some characters like, say, Captain Jack Sparrow from Pirates of Caribbean belonged in the same universe as say Woody from Toy Story, right? Like there wasn't a shared narrative there. And so part of the evolution of Disney, in its modern incarnation, has been trying to figure out, okay, how do we square these properties together and where do we draw the lines? So, some of them were drawn for Disney by, purchasing, like Star Wars is obviously different from Marvel because they were purchased separately and they grew separately. But it has been a challenge for Disney, sort of where do you collect the IP and say it's a share world? And where do you divide the IP where you lose the synergies and the cross-sell potential and some things, but you protect something of itself? So I view that as kind of a classic intellectual problem for modern Disney. So with all that said, Riot recently, and I mean very recently, became a company with from like one IP to like dozens of IPs, right? I mean, I know at least from an external perspective. Obviously, internally, you guys have known about this for a while, but Valorant, being I think the most prominent example. How does Riot think about the world of Valorant versus the world of League of Legends and opportunities for intersection versus divergence? How do you guys draw that line strategically?
I will just add,
It's
Matt, before you
good.
answer, would love
Yep.
specifically also how you think about it purely from a partnerships perspective, right? When you approach partners, is there a discussion around Riot, capital R, or is there a league discussion and a Valorant discussion
Yeah.
separately? Or
Yep. No, all very good questions. And I think, the way that if you look at the titles, like remove Valorant for a second. If you just look at League, you look at lore, you look at, Legends of Runeterra or Teamfight Tactics, they all live within Runeterra, right? It's all the champions cross over, but they're all there. Wild Rift, similarly, obviously, as that comes out into the wild, no pun intended, a little bit more, it's still League of Legends, right? It is still that IP. So in that sense, we've been able to focus and build and I think curate all of that. So there's a lot of stuff underbelly, kind of the duck analogy or the iceberg analogy where everything looks great up top and underneath everyone's running around and scrambling. But from what I can share, the first sort of shift away from that was Valorant, right? But Valorant was meant to be a brand new title. It's a brand new genre. Of course, we weren't just working on it, in June and said, hey, let's launch like next month. Like there was a lot that went into it. But a lot of the background here too was how do we get into the lore? And so I think what you're trying to talk about, William, is like, where are they going to intersect, right? At what point in time will there be an intersection? To use another one of your wonderful buzzwords, where is the metaverse going to come into play where someone walks out and says, it's my Ready Player One Riot world and here I am and I can go do all that? There will be a day at some point. Yes, I'm sure there will be a day. But I think right now, just to take a quick step back, and I know I can see that you're itching to say something, William, but I think Valorant is still so early in its life cycle. I mean, it literally launched in June. So there's still a lot of story, June of last year. There's a lot of story that we still need to tell. And I think what we've learned from League of our other titles is we've been able to game came out and lore was very there together. And like these things kind of like built and grew over time, but like very harmoniously. And with Valorant, it's like it kind of came out and the game just took off and people are playing it. And I love it. And I know, Paul, you probably got a couple comments about that as well. But I think like we need a little bit of time. We need to be smart about it. If we just came out and said, boom, here you go, spaghetti on the wall, like the community might not get too excited, or they might just say, oh, I have everything. Like, but the fact that it's coming out like episodically, right? There are acts that are coming into play. You can start to see that there's small little like cross channels of how we're bringing these things together. And of course, like as time goes on, we don't just have a title, we have multiple titles. Sure, there's opportunities for crossovers. There's opportunities for us to interweave these things. But again, I can't really say yes or no. I could say at some point in the 20s, sure, and just kind of leave it at that. But that's as far as I can probably go.
Matt, wink twice if all of it comes together in a Riot MMO.
Yeah.
I mean, we have talked about MMOs. I'm winking quite a lot, so and/or blinking quite a lot.
You wink 3 times.
I'd have to go talk to Greg Street on that one.
Yeah.
You wink 3 times, and we have no idea. So.
Yeah, we have no idea what's going on. But like, I do think it's interesting because like it did surprise me because I had thought Riot was kind of on a Star Wars strategy, right? Particularly back when I think was it in 2017, when I think Riot got really serious about storytelling, at least from an external perspective. And I don't know if that year is quite right, but I think it was like around 3 years ago when like I remember seeing a lot of announcements around consolidation and focus on storytelling and like, which I thought was very mature. But I sort of got the sense of the point Riot was going to go Disney. Like they had Runeterra, that was their brand. But then Valorant being its own world, like it didn't have to be, right? Like there are guns in League of Legends, like Jinx is a very popular character. Was there ever a strategic conversation about, look, let's just make this the League of Legends FPS? And if so, why wasn't it the League of Legends FPS? And by the way, if you don't answer this or I'm pushing too much, we can leave it alone. I'm just curious about how people delineate the IP.
No, I mean, look, I think you can push and you can ask. There's probably only so much I'm going to be able to publicly communicate in these forums. But I mean, it's it's not to say that our publishing team and the leadership team didn't have multiple conversations. Like, again, these things don't come up all day. You need to build the gameplay. You need to actually dive into what's happening and the look and the feel. I think there definitely was a mindset of, this is a brand new genre, like completely new genre for us. And so we wanted to explore some opportunities to do different things. Even if you look at a lot of the people on the game team and just kind of their visions, and you see what Anna is trying to do, and a lot of the other individuals who've come from the CS space and, another, to try and figure out like, okay, what's our map strategy? Where do we go forward? So again, I think there's a lot to come on the Valorant side. We're still, again, very, very early embryonic stages of the game. It's gotten a lot of hype and we're super excited about that, but there's definitely more time. I think that you'll start to see some of this start to rise to the top, William.
Matt, on the partnership side specifically, I'd love to understand. I come back to the question I had before, which was, when you go out and talk to brands or potential partners, two questions here. One, do you feel like over the last few years, anything has changed on the brand side? Are they more sophisticated now? Are they better educated now? Like, has that space evolved at all in your mind? And two, how do you approach it now that you have sort of League and Valorant and, obviously Teamfight Tactics and other things, but like League and Valorant being obviously, I think, the two big tent poles here. Are those conversations, again, sort of had from a Riot perspective, or are they had from a, hey, we need to do something on Valorant kind of perspective?
Yeah, good, two quick questions. So I think kind of going in reverse order, now that there is multi-title, now that we have developed ecosystems and that we've actually like built a schedule of when these events are going to happen, yes, the conversation is turning more into brands who say, I want to have an alignment with Riot. Like, I want to be, it's the capital R conversation, which is great in many ways, right? Because it also helps further just push that partnership forward, right? Because if I'm working with a brand and then I go to a different league, like technically, yes, we are able to look at one league with one auto and another league with another auto, but it makes a lot more sense to just go to them and say, do you want to have a connection across the board? Because we know what we're doing and we can actually talk to each other across those broadcasts, right? You can talk to someone in LCS, you can point to something in Valorant Challengers, you can then point to something in TFT. The conversation and that singular thread go across. But to your point, though, not every brand is interested in every category. There are some brands with certain KPIs and certain brand identities that they might not want to be associated with an FPS, or they might not want to be associated with lore because card games just don't do it for them, right? So I think in that mindset, it's not just square peg, round hole, like you're buying Riot, you buy all these games and take it and go. It really comes down to what is your core and where do you want to go? So I think that's kind of the first approach. The second one is absolutely, like, brands have become a lot more astute, I can't speak, apologies, to what's going on in the space, but there's still a lot of education that needs to be done. And I think that's also because, like, look, what happened in 2020 and COVID and all the rest of it, gaming, humbly enough, was able to continue to persevere, right? And like, we were able to continue doing what we needed to do, where a lot of other places weren't. And so with free to play, people acclimated to it. So it was a great year. There was a lot of DAUs, a lot of MAUs, et cetera. With that being said, we were kind of thrust into the bullseye or into the limelight, right? And it's almost like with great power comes great responsibilities. Again, I'll use the Spider-Man quote. But it's really one of those situations where, yes, there are more brands in different categories that I don't think would have been on a trajectory to get involved in gaming. They would have been like, I don't really know. Maybe it's 2025. Like, we'll see. I'll wait for my kids to grow up and then they'll tell me what to do. And then that turned into I don't know where else to go, so I need to do this. But there's still a lot of confusion, right? The fog of war is real. And there's a lot of, for lack of a better term, bad actors out there that are saying, give me money, thank you, and then I'm going to go do this. And then what happens is that just sours the perception across. So I'd say at the same time, agencies are like media agencies, right, and holding companies are getting more involved. And they're doing that because there's money to be made in terms of like their own business strategies. But at the same time, they want to become smarter about, okay, how do we approach streaming platforms? How do we approach OTT? How do we approach this? And that's, I think, really interesting in the space, because it's no longer I'm talking to William because he's the brand manager and that's it. It is now I'm talking to William. he says, this is great. But then Paul comes in and goes, hey, I'm the one controlling the purse strings on your media dollars or your sponsorship dollars. So I need to understand how this compares to sport B or whatever else I want to do. So it's actually an amazing time, to be very honest. Like it's awesome. Like my team is growing as well, and it's growing. Like we need more bandwidth, not because we have more titles, but because there's more happening. And so it's a really exciting moment. Does that answer kind of your questions?
No, it does. I am curious though. Do you think it's just a matter of time before most of the big brands, most brands, period, sort of get on the bandwagon, or do you think the gap still requires conscious like education?
I would say, well, yes, it's a matter of time, but there still needs to be some education. I think like the trail or the breadcrumb trail is there, or the Skittles trail, or call it whatever you want, is there where people are actually finding out where they want, but it's not laid out in front of you foot by foot. It's kind of like it's 8 feet away and then you see it and then you make the next leap and then you do it. And then they go talk to their friends and say, oh, I got this. That was really well. It worked awesome. It helped with whatever bottom line and KPI. I want to now get involved. But I mean, I would still say, and like my own little kind of like podium here at Soapbox, like there are definitely categories that I believe are missing like an opportunity here. And I think like fashion and beauty being one of them. And yes, we have LVMH, amazing, like clearly fashion got that, great, awesome, amazing partnership. But even getting into beauty and like talking about like makeup lines and talking about like the Sephoras of the world and so forth, there is such an ecosystem and this culture of cosplay and just connectivity and community that's there that I don't think brands are like, well, I feel like it's all men. And because of that, men aren't going to wear mascara. So I don't want to go to the market and do that. Well, first of all, William, you know this, whenever you go back on stage for HOTS, like everyone goes under makeup before they go on stage. Every single person is under makeup. On top of that, cosplay is a thing. And I mean, like the influencer team, like at Riot, like Sarah and Mel are amazing and they support this so much. And if a brand really positioned themselves as, I just want to be here to do this, not I want to just do a licensing thing, I think there's so much that can happen. There's a stat I'm trying to remember, I feel like it came from YouGov that said, I think last year, like 30% of all video game viewership was by women. Which like most people would think, oh, it's probably 0.5%, or it's, like whatever. They randomly saw it because their SO was telling them to sit down and, look at something and they didn't know what it was. But yeah, I mean, you flip that over and on the kind of the influencer streamer side, right? There's like 1% of women in the top 250 or 300, like, top Twitch streamers. So of course, like there's opportunity here. And I think there's places for brands to do it, but we're making the right moves. From when I came here 2.5 years ago to where I am now, literally night and day. The conversations are much like it comes in with a different mindset of, okay, how are you different than this versus I've heard about you because my kid plays or they're paying and buying these skins every month and I'm really confused. Why should I do this? And now it's more of the like, okay, I need to be here. It's really important to me. This is no longer a question. I just need to know how my brand can fit in your space. Can you help me with that? And that's, I think, the really amazing thing.
Yeah, if you include mobile, actually the male female ratio is actually even closer to 50-50. Like the mobile world sort of changes those ratios significantly, but even without it, to your point, I have seen those 30% kind of numbers, viewership numbers. William, I know you had a couple questions. I wanted to jump into teams and Riot relevant to
sure.
But if you had a question before on this line.
I have so many questions. You know what? Let's do this. I think it's time to change topics, but
okay.
Yeah, we'll see if there's time at the end for me to sneak in one or two more because there's a lot I'm curious about. So
we are gonna. Don't worry, guys. If you're listening, stay till the end. Matt will be announcing the release date for the Riot MMO. So make sure you listen right till the end of this
in
episode.
The 20s. In the 20s.
They got to listen right till the end.
Sorry, I forgot. I will wait. Literally the last.
The last number, Matt. We need the last number, not the first three. We need the last one.
Here I try and run a show here that people will listen to right till the end. No, I want to just bring up this article I saw. It was an infographic. It was sort of related to the Forbes article on esports teams valuations, which we had talked about a few months ago. This one in some ways is better because they list some of these things more clearly, but they're talking about the top 10 esports companies. And if you take out enthusiast gaming, which only like 6% of all their revenue comes from esports, out of the top 9 most valuable esports companies, 7 have League of Legends franchises. When we talked about this the first time on the podcast, Matt, one of the comments I think William made, and it was a very astute insight, was the only way to be a valuable esports team these days is to have a League of Legends franchise, it seems, because that is the common thread for all of them. How do you think? I would love some insight on how Riot got to that point, because we've seen others, and this is my words, not yours. We've seen others, I think, stumble. Like you look at the Activision Blizzard leagues, I think stumble is probably the nicest word I can come up with to describe that situation there. And Valorant is showing real promise in a similar sense, right? It feels homegrown. It feels more organic. Like you feel the potential there that League has sort of realized. What is the recipe you think that Riot has figured out on the esports front in terms of creating value that others have not?
Yeah, I mean, I would also call out on that stat that those teams that did not have League of Legends teams all have Valorant teams, so they're now actually part of our ecosystem. So you could technically state that all of those teams are collectively within our world.
There you
go. So there.
I like that. There you go. 100%.
We have 100%. No, I think it comes down to the way that we've really just approached, I think, our ecosystem in terms of how we've built League of Legends esports, and then also how we're starting to go through things with Valorant. And a lot of that is, and again, to just bounce back on it, but it's really community first. And I think that is something that, even though this will ramp up to teams, but the community are the ones that are saying, you need to go do this, or we want more of this, or show me more Valorant, or show me more League of Legends. And that allows us to build that base and that infrastructure. And I think with that being said, we've been able to go in and look, the LCS teams that were on there for North America, when we went in and we did franchising, and again, like publicly when teams bought in, it was between $10 to $13 million is what they paid. But it was predicated on, where are we going to be in 5 years, in 6 years, in 7 years, in 8 years? It was never predicated on, okay, is there a quick out? Like, can I do this for 9 months and then it's going to be awesome and then I'm going to go try to sell to the highest bidder? It was really more about, how are we going to align? How are we going to build this? And I think the way that we've tried to structure our leagues and just the overall ecosystem is really to handhold them. And of course, we're friends, we're brothers and sisters. We argue and disagree sometimes, of course. Everyone wants more money, everyone wants more of everything. But that's the beauty of having owners meetings. That's the beauty of having franchise leagues. And I think for us in particular, as we've really driven forward with this, it's looking at, okay, again, where do we want to go with the sport, right? It's a 12, 14 month, 24 month vision. And of course, it's then, okay, well, what do we need to do now to make sure we get there? But a lot of those teams that we're involved in, their owners are coming to the LCS arena every single weekend, right? Like, not even with FaZe, we're getting more and more engagement with the FaZe team because they're like, hey, we want to do more with Valorant. Like, what's going on? Like T1, same thing. T1 has a League of Legends team in the LCK in Korea, but they've got a Valorant team in North America. So we get a chance to talk to Joe and like hang out with everyone over there. So I think like those are, it's the communal conversation. And there was a quote, I think, from Hiko, again, this is quoting Hiko back when he had just come over to, I think, 100 Thieves. And he had talked about being at other FPS. And he's like, look, I didn't talk to publishers that often, but I've been like working at this at 100 Thieves. And I've had like 15 conversations with Riot in the last like month and a half. And that's incredible to me. They're like having discussions. And I think for us, it's just, how do we really drive back to, we're fans, right? Like we're fans, we're players first, we are fans. And we don't want to put out something that looks so just corporate that everyone goes like, well, this is crap. Because we can create the nicest shiny, and if under the hood is like a V1 where it's a bunch of gerbils just spinning around, like, great, I can't get to the 405. I can't even get to my office, right? So what we want to do is build something that over time can start to be kind of materialized. And I think that's just sort of the approach that we've tried to take, where we talk to our teams all the time. Like, commissioner of the LCS, I think, talks to probably every team on in the LCS maybe 3 times a day. Depends on what's going on, really. It just depends, what are we doing, where are we going, and we're always trying to make ourselves better. Just kind of I don't know if that helps answer your question. It's not short term, it's more long term. Go ahead, William.
So you actually said the thing that was my last question I really wanted to ask you, which is trying to always be better. Because I was thinking one of the reasons of, I always like to think like, well, obviously Riot has been very, very successful, and very, very successful where a lot of other companies have, as to use Paul's words, have maybe not had as much success, right? And I thought before this podcast, I was thinking, geez, what's the thing that you would say, William, that Riot does differently from these other companies from an outsider's view that maybe accounts for this? And the big thing I would say as being a third party is learning, right? It really looks like, this might come across as a criticism, please take this, but it's intended, but like, I'll use Valorant as an example, right? I don't think Valorant launched as the greatest game it could possibly be. I don't. And that's a subjective opinion. I'm probably wrong. A lot of people are hating me for this. However, I think if you look at where Valorant is today and where it was 6 months ago, there's been constant evolution, progress, and innovation, right? From fundamental things like map design, right? All the way up to just, aesthetic polish. It really shows iteration and improvement and responsiveness to feedback to grow something. So wherever Riot starts, it's just a starting point and it goes upwards from there. And, that's hard to do in companies. It's really hard to create a culture that has continual improvement and continual learning, because it requires self-awareness and self-criticism. And the question I wanted to ask is a little bit of an HR question, like, how is that true, A? And B, if it is true, what does Riot do differently to get that sort of culture internally that maybe other companies don't necessarily have?
So a couple things to say on that. One, the Valorant patch notes are like novels. So if anybody is actually really excited to figure out what we're doing and why we're doing it, you can jump into those patch notes and you'll probably spend 25 minutes of your life saying like, okay, this is awesome. I now understand why Riot is doing that. And that's purposeful, right? It's not just someone saying, I'm bored, let me write a bunch of stuff on a piece of paper. It's trying to understand and hear the community. Look, my experience at Riot, and we say this very, very solemnly, is like, we want to be the most player-focused company, right? That is our mantra. It's everywhere. It's on our walls. It's in our decks. It's in everything we do, and that's stitched into who we are. That really manifests itself through our hiring process, which is not short for anyone who's like come through Riot or whatever. There's not just one interview where, hey, I had a conversation with you. You seem amazing. I love you. Like, let's come on board. We really look at things from a value perspective, a craft perspective, a collaboration perspective, like all of these various aptitudes that you can deliver to figure out not only are you going to fit within the team that you're trying to join, are you going to fit from a cross-cultural standpoint? Because there is so much of a connectivity that we have. I mean, even now, again, like most businesses, we're always on, Hangouts or Zooms or Blue Jeans or you name it. Like we're doing that all the time, or StreamYard, et cetera. We're doing this stuff at all times. So I think for us, if you can't connect or talk to other groups or disciplines within Riot, that's usually part of like an issue. So we always try to make sure we aim towards that, because like not everyone who's coming into the company is meant to be a platinum League of Legends player, right? Like that's not the case. If you're coming in to be a game design person or something along those lines, you probably should know what the meta is and have an understanding of all the patches from the last, 2.5 years, right? That makes sense. But if you're coming in from a legal or a finance standpoint, great. Well, you need to have, a legal degree. You need to have a doctorate, master's. But beyond that, you need to be able to have those connections, because if you can't talk to someone within the company, the mission is kind of lost. And I think that's why sometimes it's a little slow for us to hire. And every writer would be like, I want to hire someone faster. Like, of course, but we want to make sure, again, it's the right people on the bus. Horrible analogy, but it's getting the right people on the bus that can actually be there to deliver forward. And we always, no one is satisfied. Again, just another example, like our broadcast team, and I do want to do a quick shout out to our broadcast team just really quickly. And I know it's a business, the podcast thing. We'll say this: if the broadcast and engineering teams were not able to do whatever they do in their dark magic, particularly last year, going from LAN to remote, there would have been no leagues and there would have been no business. So that's my correlation back to what we're saying here. And it's not just within Riot, but it's like everyone was able to do that and create those things. But when we tend to look at this, it really just kind of lost my train of thought. Sorry, I had my acknowledgement to the broadcasting, lost my train of thought. I apologize. Bear with me; it'll come back to me in a second.
You were telling us the release date for the MMO.
Yes, that's going to be December. That's it. That was a good try, though. But no, I mean, I think it really just comes down to like the overarching collaboration, the connectivity, and just people being able to kind of work together, kind of across your teams.
Matt, I have one question around geography. It's related again to an article I saw. I'll just bring it up here. The headline was Riot Games returns to China for League of Legends Worlds. Obviously Riot owned by Tencent. China is a nexus for you guys. How do you think about the partnership side, specifically in this case, but from a geographic perspective? Like, is China much more important for, brands that want to come into League? Is North America much more important for brands that want to come into Valorant? Like, do you break up the world at all in your mind from a partnership perspective? Curious how you and Riot more broadly think about geography here. Yeah, for sure. So, well, one, to just comment on that, like, last year with all that was going on with COVID, it was our 10-year anniversary of the World Championships. The goal was to always go to China, and we just didn't have an opportunity to do what we wanted to do. We had to go to a single place and kind of that bubble, so to speak. We were able to get fans in, which was amazing. Again, ton of work that went into that. So not to say it's a run it back, but we want to make sure we go back there so that we can actually deliver on Valorant reference there too.
There
Excellent.
You go. It's really going back to like, we wanted to do what we had planned to do all year long. And last year, and there was so much work, like, again, these World Championships don't happen in a month. It starts in January and it carries all the way through. So we just didn't have a chance to do it. And this is the way to do that. Beyond that, to your other point, we are very much a global local company. And I think that also hits to your point, William, of like, how do we do things a little bit differently? And a lot of that is, yes, there is a core strategy, right? There is a core publishing strategy or a game strategy of, here's how we want to take the game out, right? Valorant is going to launch here. We're going to launch in these markets. We're going to do this. This is the next act. Here's where we go, right? But then beyond that, the regions are the ones that are kind of like the CEO of, okay, what are we going to do within the region? So there could be an activation that we just realize in North America, our players might not get that excited about, thing A. So we might say, we're not going to really support it. We're here, but we're going to focus on this other thing. Whereas in China or Korea, they go, oh my gosh, like this is what our community has been asking for like 7 years. Like we are going to just, everything stops and that's all we're going to do. So, I mean, I think, again, globally, like all of our games are global in nature. I think, again, going back to like teams and how we've set things up, because we are and we know we're global, we do have those regions. The regions activate like, what do we want to do here? So again, you can have a partnership in North America that's different than what we're doing in EU. And that's actually manifested itself in, like, if you look at autos, right? I have Honda as my partner, the LEC, even though I would say NA is always better than EU. They have Kia. And then, you look at like the LPL in China, they've got Mercedes. Worlds, Global Events has Mercedes as well. So it offers more opportunity for brands to figure out, like, where do you want to target? What's the most important to you? Is it Halo Global, or is it I want to activate in LA and San Francisco and Chicago and New York every other weekend? And that opens up more opportunities for them. So I think like that's kind of been the process. And then going back to just the thing I was hinting at with teams and stuff, like even when we look at it, we wanted, like when the LCS like franchise, right? It wasn't that we wanted to focus, the game had been out for a while. So as I talked about this last time, it was, we know that Cloud9 has a global brand. We also know that they're here. So we want to be able to work with Cloud9 and work with Team Liquid and work with TSM and 100 Thieves to evangelize the power that comes into all of that. And so that's really how we've done it. Of course, there's loyalty and there's, like fandom. That's just, how is NA going to do what they're going to do? And how is EU going to do what they're going to do? But like, at the end of the day, that we've kept that mantra. And, as Valorant matures as well and continues to go forward, I will say, I think NA is crushing it when it comes to Valorant right now, which is really exciting specifically for me. Like we'll see where it goes, but we've got a track record of doing a certain thing with that global kind of halo perspective, and then obviously being able to activate at a regional level. And I think that also goes back to who is the player, who is the end user, who is the consumer, and why. And if we put ourselves in their mind versus just trying to say, buy this thing, that's where we can actually have that one-to-one connection. You can't do that if you have one person who has to talk to 300 million people. Eventually they're like, I don't even know, like, who are you and what are you doing? But when you have teams that are focused on more specific elements, that's where you can have that discussion.
And you don't find the Tencent ownership pulls you in any way sort of eastward or has any, look, I did a little video last week on Tencent last year, record number of M&A deals. They did like 31 acquisitions in the gaming space. Like, I'm curious, I'm always curious if there's any, if they meddling's the wrong word, but if they put any pressure on Riot to do things a certain way, or if they add value even, right? Like, because they own so many game publishers now, like is there any value from the Tencent relationship that I don't know if you can talk to, Matt, but I'm always curious what forces they exert in the background when they go buy game publishers.
So I'm not on my executive board and can't speak to all of the behind the scene elements. However, we are our own entity and we do operate in that mentality. Like, yes, there's obviously ownership. Yes, there's some conversation, of course, but we are free to do what we need to do to deliver what we have. You can go back and look at Wild Rift coming out now versus other titles that Tencent produced in other places in the past. And, we were very stoic towards, this is how we want to do this, and this is where we're going to go. And so we are producing that. I think, has there been value? Of course, they're a massive organization, right? But, like in that mindset, we go to China, of course, they're in China. Like, are there ways that they can help us make worlds even bigger and better for everyone? Absolutely, right? When we come here, if we do something in LA, well, heck, we've got Riot's HQ right here. Of course, we're going to know people to be able to help conversation, but we are fundamentally separate entities that do operate in that way.
Matt, I want to bring up one last article, and that is from VentureBeat here, and it's Anzu.io raises $9 million for in-game ad platform. I don't want to. I'm not necessarily wanting to talk about this, fundraising specifically. I am curious how you guys are looking at in-game ads from a partnership perspective. Is this something I know you guys have dabbled with it. I think you did something with MasterCard. Correct me if I'm wrong. Where the banners and games and things, were changed out. But, is there plans to do a lot more? Like, what is the feeling at Riot internally around in-game ads and selling sort of in-game advertising?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I actually had a call earlier today where I was talking to someone about this. So I will try to just regurgitate that again. I think so. Yeah, last year we launched what we refer to as kind of our in-banner or SR banner, Summoner's Rift kind of banner ads, and that lives just within the esports ecosystem. So we still keep very much to use like the walled garden of, like, when you are a consumer or a player who's going in and playing our game, we want you to have the experience of playing the game and not just like berate you with like, oh my God, what's going on? Like, I don't need to be sold to anymore, right? It is a free to play game. Obviously, digital goods is where the company makes its money, right? As much as I love esports and yes, we'll be profitable, like, that's not keeping the lights on at Riot, right? There's a lot of other things that are happening. But like, that being said, that is a product that we put through a lot of Q&A. We did a lot of testing. We brought people out to Riot that were fans to be like, hey, what do you think? Like, people who've been watching, just to kind of get a knee-jerk reaction. Is this something that's actually going to manifest itself positively? Or is someone as a viewer or anyone else as a fan looking at it and going, what is wrong with you? Like, why would you I'm done, right? Like, I'm out of this. I don't want these ads anymore. Where's the skip ad button? Like, let's move on. So I think for us, like, particularly with the audience that we have, we ran through that. And when that launched, like, it launched extremely well. I mean, obviously we had Nielsen evaluate everything. It's one of the most valuable inventory pieces that we actually have. It's our effectively, like, it's our pitch, it's our hockey arena, like, the ads you see on the side. We had Honda from the LCS as like our partner kind of going into it. The LEC had a different strategy, but we're very bullish on this. I mean, from what I've seen, like our approach has really been like, okay, we want to actually like find partners to own the different lanes, the different positions. Like that's kind of our approach going into it, so that you can do that and you can engage and you can do Easter eggs or different creative and all the rest of that stuff. But I think right now the mindset is, let's still see how it carries out within esports and the competitive viewing experience, versus flip the switch on, okay, you load up into League or Valorant and suddenly you're going, oh my good Lord, what is happening to me? But I think at the same time, like what is like really cognizant here and kind of goes back to the core is the environment through which you're playing, right? Like Summoner's Rift is Runeterra. It is not like, you know, an alley. It is not cyberpunk future where you can put billboards up and all the rest of it. It needs to be very organic to the space. Valorant affords us a little bit of a different opportunity. Like there actually are walls. Like maybe you could see a billboard or maybe a wanted post or something like that where it actually could make sense. So I think for us, we're cautiously optimistic about the approach, but we just want to do it the right way. Because if we go overboard, as everyone knows, someone's like, yeah, I made money, but at the end of the day, like it just falls flat. And you know, if we don't have viewers, then what are we doing? So
what I'm hearing is we may never see a William Collis wanted sign in Valorant, you know, on a wall somewhere, although as hilarious as that would be. But we may see a business of esports sock based champion in League, right?
100% with extra RGB.
No, but it's a good distinction, because what you're finding, like there's a coffee shop in one of the Valorant maps. I forget what it's called. I probably should remember, but like that could turn into a Starbucks, right? Like that, I could see that, or another coffee chain sponsor, but we wouldn't see Ronald McDonald as the new champion. You know, like there's like lines
that would be a fun champion to play. I kind of want to know what his abilities are.
And in a nice way, maybe this goes full circle to my question about the divergence between the Valorant League IP, right? Like I think, you know, things that's coming out here a little bit is like there's flexibility across sponsorship categories if you have different types of IP, right? Because they can, if brands feel different, they can belong to different classes of sponsor. So maybe that's a nice tie. I don't know, but throwing it out there.
No, you're right.
Ahead, Matt.
Like at the end of the day, sorry, I was going to at the end of the day, you're correct. Like we don't take the one shoe, you know, one size fits all mentality. It really needs to be about the approach and where we want to go. And so if somebody is eager to get involved in team fight tactics, well, hey, we can double and triple down on that. And they don't have to be involved in anything else. That's the approach. It's not the old like upfront TV model of, I'm going to give you everything here that you want, which is prime time, and then I'm going to throw all this stuff in overnight that you're going to have to take because you just got to take it. Like that's not our mentality.
Matt, I will say, look, we love having you on. You have to come back. You have to come do the live stream with us at some point. It's this, but more out of control. But I am going to put some pressure here. You cannot mess up this Riot MMO, okay? I've been waiting for another great MMO for the last 15 years here. The Riot is my last best hope, I think, in this space. And so no pressure, but please don't mess it up.
Yeah, and
look, I will say this, because I said it on another podcast. If anyone can make a metaverse work, a MMO work, it's Riot, right? If anyone's going to figure it out, it's you guys. And so I am incredibly hopeful for that. But you know, congrats on everything going on with League and Valorant. I will say I've also been playing Valorant the last couple of weeks. I gave it another try after my initial try, and it is growing on me. I have to admit, it's growing on me, and I kind of love that the whole space has felt really organic. It's really special, I think, what's happening in the competitive space there. And I really think only Riot has figured out how to do that. It's quite an amazing accomplishment. So how can people find you, Matt, if they want to follow you? If we have a lot of brands, obviously, that listen to the podcast, like how can they find you?
So real quick before I say that on the MMO front, because I know you wouldn't let me off here unless I do say something. Obviously, it was the most fanfared announcement ever, simply by Greg Street, just saying, "Hey, here's a tweet, like congratulations." Like, of course, you know, very Riot fashion, like, "Hey, here's this thing we're gonna do." Like, thank you so much. Of course, I think both Mark and Nicolo have hinted at it for like the last 2.5 years, just to get rises out of people. It is true. It is something. And there is going to be a lot of hiring that's going to be happening because there's a lot of work that needs to go into it. So it's not going to happen probably by the end of 2021, very likely not a 2022 Q1 rollout, but it is something that we need to do. And I think everyone's aware of the space as it is and who's been in that space and how well they've done. And we need to make sure that we're not just like copy pasting, but we're doing it for our audience and for everyone that we have. I think beyond that, I would also just kind of call out, so people find me like, I think LinkedIn's a pretty good way. I try to engage a lot of people on that front. I don't want to give out my email because then things will just get even crazier. I try to stay away from some social media stuff as much as I can because that's a deep, dark rabbit hole that you can't ever get out of. LinkedIn is probably a good spot for people to connect with me on.
Perfect. Matt Archambault on LinkedIn, guys. If you're listening, go follow him there. Matt, thank you as always. We probably could have spent another 3 hours talking about just Riot. Of course, we never really get to any news when the guests are this good.
Yeah, we didn't even get to talk about how great the Valorant Q music is, which like I was desperate to bring up. That is like, so good. Anyway,
I'm just saying, if Riot cracks the MMO nut, you guys will be completely unstoppable. I mean, already you're the one of the big juggernaut in the space, but like if you crack that World of Warcraft nut and make something really special happen on the MMO front, I just see total dominance in the gaming space. Guys, don't forget, every Wednesday evening, live stream, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. Also, don't forget to go buy William's book, The Book of Esports. You can go find it on Amazon. Make sure to check out my minutes, my Business of Esports minutes every Monday. It's the 3 sort of most important stories of the week. It's a quick 2-minute video. Get everything you need to know. And as always, please tell your friends about the podcast. Go leave a 5-star rating and review. It's how people find it. We really appreciate it. And on that note, we will see you guys next week.
Goodbye, some RGB socks.